The storm hit like the universe had a personal vendetta against anything foolish enough to be outside. Dr. Elias Verne had always prided himself on his ability to read weather patterns, a skill honed over 5 years of Arctic isolation, but this blizzard had materialized out of nowhere with the kind of meteorological spite that made him question whether he'd angered some ancient god of winter. His thermal suit struggled against wind that howled with voices he almost recognized, and his goggles were rapidly becoming decorative rather than functional. He'd gone out for supplies. Simple. Routine. The kind of thing he'd done 100 times before without incident. But the universe, he'd learned, had a dark sense of humor about routine. The research station was somewhere ahead, probably. His GPS had given up the ghost about 20 minutes ago, replaced by static and what sounded suspiciously like polka music, which made absolutely no sense unless the satellites had developed a cruel sense of irony. Elias trudged forward, each step a negotiation between his will to live and the snow's apparent desire to become his eternal resting place. That's when his scanner started screaming. Not literally screaming, of course. That would have been too straightforward. Instead, it emitted a series of chirps and whistles that his equipment shouldn't have been capable of producing, displaying thermal signatures that danced across the screen like drunken fireflies. Elias stopped, which was dangerous in a whiteout, and stared at the readings. The signatures were warm, definitely warm, but the pattern was all wrong. Arctic foxes didn't register like this. Neither did polar bears, researchers who'd gotten lost, or any of the dozen other things that might conceivably be out here dying in the snow. He should have ignored it. Protocol was clear about deviations during emergency conditions. Get to safety first, investigate anomalies later, preferably with backup and coffee. But Elias had spent 5 years running away from his last encounter with the unknown, and apparently, that particular cowardice had an expiration date. He followed the readings deeper into the storm, his scanner now producing sounds that reminded him of whale songs mixed with dial-up internet. The snow was trying to bury everything, smoothing the world into undifferentiated white, but there, just ahead, a shape that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was a rock formation, some geological quirk he'd never noticed before. Then the wind shifted, and he saw her. She was half buried, snow piling against her like the earth itself was trying to claim her. But what stopped his heart wasn't the snow or the obvious hypothermia or even the fact that she was clearly not human. It was her arms, wrapped with desperate strength around 2 impossibly tiny bundles pressed against her chest. Her ears, elongated and elegant, poked through dark hair matted with ice. Her skin had a translucent quality, and beneath it, faint patterns of light pulsed with decreasing frequency, like a battery running down. The babies, because that's what they obviously were, made sounds that cut through the storm. Not quite crying, not quite anything he could categorize, but desperate in a way that transcended species. Elias stood there, snow accumulating on his shoulders, and had what he would later recognize as a moment of pure, unfiltered insanity. Every regulation, every protocol, every lesson learned from his spectacular failure at first contact 5 years ago screamed at him to call it in, to follow procedure, to not make this worse. Instead, he dropped his supply pack and moved forward. She didn't resist when he gathered them up. She might have been conscious, might have understood what was happening, but her body had gone beyond resistance into that final stage where the cold makes everything soft and distant. Elias worked quickly, tucking one infant under each arm like the world's most precious footballs, then hoisting the woman across his shoulders in a fireman's carry that his back would complain about for weeks. She weighed less than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was doing interesting things to his perception of physics. The journey back to the station was something he would never fully remember. His legs moved automatically, his body understanding that stopping meant death even if his mind wanted to catalog all the ways this was the worst decision he'd ever made. The infants made sounds against his ribs, vibrations he felt more than heard. The woman's breathing was shallow, almost absent, her fading light patterns creating strange shadows in the storm. He nearly walked past the station twice. The storm had transformed everything, making the familiar alien and the alien somehow comforting. When his hand finally hit the external door panel, he almost wept with relief. The scanner chirped recognition, and the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like salvation. Inside, the sudden silence was deafening. Elias laid them out on his laboratory floor, the woman still clutching her babies even in near death, and stared at what he'd done. His hands were shaking. Whether from cold or terror or belated common sense, he couldn't tell. The infants looked up at him with eyes too large and dark, their small faces displaying expressions he had no framework to interpret. The woman's light patterns were barely visible now, faint pulses under skin that seemed too fragile to contain life. He'd gone. The first 48 hours were a masterclass in improvisation that would have horrified every xenobiology professor Elias had ever studied under. He'd transformed his laboratory into something between an intensive care unit and a very confused nursery, using equipment that was absolutely not designed for this purpose but was adapting admirably under duress. The infants, he discovered, had lungs and vocal cords that worked overtime. They didn't cry exactly, but they produced a sound that started as a hum and escalated into something that made his coffee mug vibrate sympathetically on the counter. He tried everything to calm them during that first night. Rocking didn't work. Singing definitely didn't work, though he suspected his off-key rendition of ancient lullabies might have traumatized them permanently. What eventually worked was his tablet playing white noise recordings of ocean waves, which seemed deeply ironic given their current location surrounded by frozen wasteland. He'd fashioned bottles from laboratory glassware, using rubber tubing and careful calibration to create something that wouldn't poison them. The formula was his own invention, a mixture of synthesized proteins and nutrients based on his best guess at their biology. The woman's biochemistry gave him clues. Her blood, when he'd carefully drawn a sample, was similar enough to human that his equipment could analyze it, but different in ways that made him scribble notes frantically between diaper changes. Yes, diaper changes. He'd cut up absorbent lab materials and created what could generously be called functioning diapers, held together with medical tape and hope. The woman herself remained unconscious, her body fighting a battle Elias could only observe and try to support. Her bioluminescent patterns fluctuated wildly, sometimes brightening until his lab looked like it was hosting a very subdued rave, other times fading until he checked her pulse with mounting panic. He'd rigged and for using his medical supplies, pumping her full of electrolytes and glucose while hoping their biochemistry was compatible enough that he wasn't accidentally poisoning her. On the second morning, while he was attempting to feed both infants simultaneously, balancing bottles in a way that would have impressed a circus performer, she opened her eyes. Elias nearly dropped both babies. Her eyes were amber gold, with pupils that contracted into vertical slits in the laboratory light. She stared at him with such intensity that he froze, suddenly aware of how absolutely insane this entire situation appeared. He was unshaven, running on maybe 6 total hours of sleep spread across 2 days, wearing a lab coat stained with substances he didn't want to identify, and holding 2 alien infants who were currently making sounds like malfunctioning synthesizers. She blinked slowly, her gaze moving from him to the babies and back again. Then her face crumpled, and tears started flowing in a way that transcended species. She tried to sit up, failed, tried again with determination that bordered on violence. Elias set the babies down carefully in the supply crate he'd lined with blankets, then moved to help her. She flinched at first, but desperation overcame fear. He supported her weight as she reached for her children, and the sound she made when she touched them was something between a sob and a prayer. They stayed like that for several minutes, Elias awkwardly holding her upright while she ran trembling fingers over tiny faces, counting fingers and toes with the universal anxiety of every parent checking that their children were whole. The babies responded to her touch, their humming shifting into something that might have been contentment. When she finally looked at him again, her eyes were still wet but clearer. She opened her mouth, and Elias braced himself for communication issues, for the need to develop some kind of sign language or translation protocol. Instead, she spoke in perfect, accented English. "Thank you." Elias blinked. "You speak English. Your transmissions reach quite far," she said, her voice rough from disuse but steady. "We've been listening for decades." That's simultaneously reassuring and deeply unsettling, Elias replied, then immediately wondered if humor was appropriate. His social skills were rusty even with humans. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. You have no idea. She looked down at the babies again, and her expression shifted into something harder. I am Lyria. These are my children. We have no right to your kindness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Elias Verne, he said, moving to sit on the floor beside them because his legs were giving out. And you're currently in my laboratory, which means you're under my protection until you're not. That's how this works, right? I'm not great with social protocols anymore, but I'm pretty sure rescue comes with at least temporary housing. Lyria studied him with those unsettling eyes. You don't know what you're offering. Probably not, Elias admitted. But I've made worse decisions with less information. There was this incident with a Martian fungus and a misunderstanding about quarantine procedures that really redefined my personal baseline for bad choices. This time she definitely smiled, though it was fragile and brief. I was left to die, she said quietly. Not by accident. Not by chance. My people, the Kali, we have laws about genetic perfection. My children were born wrong. Elias looked at the infants, who seemed perfectly formed to his admittedly limited expertise. They look fine to me. They're too human, Lyria said, and there was a weight to those words that spoke of arguments and counsels and judgments. They lack certain markers, certain abilities. In our culture, that's enough. My partner agreed with the decision. My family agreed. Everyone agreed except me. So you stole a ship and ran, Elias said, because the evidence was fairly clear. I stole a shuttle and crashed it in your storm, Lyria corrected. Not my finest moment. The emergency beacon kept transmitting until the cold finally killed it. I tried to reach civilization, but the weather turned, and I realized we weren't going to make it. I found a depression in the snow and decided that dying together was better than what waited for them back home. The casual way she said it, like choosing death for her children was a rational decision, made something twist in Elias's chest. That's not how this story ends, he said firmly. You're alive. They're alive. We're going to keep it that way. Lyria's hand found his, her fingers longer and more delicate than human proportions, cool to the touch. We're yours now, she whispered. That's our law. You saved our lives. That creates a debt that can only be repaid with service. I don't want servants, Elias said, alarmed. I want coffee and maybe 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, but let's not get crazy with debt and service. Not servants, Lyria said, squeezing his hand. Family. That's what the debt means. We're bound to you now, for protection and care. Whether you accept it or not, that's what you've created by pulling us from the snow. Elias looked at her, then at the babies who were making those humming sounds again, then at his laboratory that had transformed into something he didn't recognize. 3 weeks into his unexpected career as an alien foster parent, Elias discovered that the twins had telekinetic abilities, and they discovered that throwing bottles was hilarious. The first incident happened during a feeding. Lyria had regained most of her strength and was sitting cross-legged on the floor, cradling the boy while Elias attempted to feed the girl. He'd gotten better at this, developing a rhythm and technique that only occasionally resulted in formula ending up in his hair. The girl finished her bottle, made a satisfied chirping sound, and the empty container shot out of his hand like it had been fired from a cannon, smashing against the far wall with enough force to crack the plastic. Elias stared. Lyria closed her eyes and sighed deeply. So, Elias said carefully, is that normal? It's supposed to manifest around 6 months, Lyria replied, not opening her eyes. They're 3 weeks old. Overachievers. Great. The boy's bottle started vibrating in Lyria's hands. She quickly set it down before he could launch it into orbit. Both infants were making sounds that Elias had learned to recognize as laughter, a burbling series of notes that would have been adorable if he wasn't calculating the structural integrity of his equipment against telekinetic toddlers. This is why they were judged defective? Elias asked, watching a pencil roll across his desk without anyone touching it. Because they can move things with their minds. Because they can't, Lyria said. She picked up the boy, who immediately tried to grab her nose with both hands and possibly telekinesis. Kaylee children should demonstrate precise control by this age. Targeted manipulation of objects at the molecular level. These two are throwing things like human infants throwing tantrums. It's crude. Unrefined. Embarrassing by our standards. By our standards, babies can't do anything except eat, sleep, and generate substances that defy the laws of physics in terms of volume, Elias said. A data pad lifted off the table and drifted lazily through the air before dropping with a clatter. I'm going to count the telekinesis as a win. Lyria's expression softened, that smile he was seeing more often breaking through her usual careful control. You have low standards. I have practical standards, Elias corrected, catching the girl as she tried to levitate herself out of his arms. Okay, new rule. No using space magic until you can walk. That's fair, right? The twins responded by making every loose object in the lab rattle simultaneously. Lyria laughed, and the sound still surprised him every time, like wind chimes in a language he was learning to understand. They'd fallen into routines that felt simultaneously natural and surreal. Mornings were feeding time, which had evolved into a complex ballet of bottles, telekinetic interception, and increasingly creative profanity from Elias. Lyria had started teaching him words in her language, mainly because his cursing had become repetitive and she claimed it was painful to listen to. Afternoons were for research. Elias had returned to his work with renewed focus, partly because it was familiar and partly because understanding Kaylee biology might keep them all alive. Lyria proved to be an excellent research assistant once she understood his equipment. She had an intuitive grasp of systems that made him suspect Kaylee education was far more advanced than Earth's. She'd fixed his malfunctioning GPS in 20 minutes using material she'd found in his recycling bin and an approach to electronics that bent several laws of physics he'd thought were mandatory. Your technology is charmingly primitive, she'd said while rewiring his communications array. Your technology apparently can't stop you from crashing in a blizzard, Elias had replied. Touché. Evenings were his favorite, though he'd never admit it out loud. They'd created a makeshift living area in the corner of the lab, surrounded by equipment that hummed and beeped like electronic lullabies. Lyria would hold both twins, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing gently in the dimmed lights, and she'd tell him about her world. The Kaylee had been spacefaring for millennia, spreading across their local cluster of stars with the kind of methodical efficiency that came from genetic engineering and rigid social structures. Every Kaylee was designed before birth, optimized for specific roles and functions. Variation was controlled. Deviation was corrected. Her children's mutation, their tendency toward human-like randomness, was seen as a dangerous step backward. We eliminated chance from our reproduction 5,000 years ago, she explained one evening while the twins dozed against her chest. Every child is a deliberate creation, genetically perfect for their intended purpose. Your species still reproduces the old way, random genetic mixing, hoping for the best. It's inefficient. It's also given us Mozart and Einstein and that one guy who invented the pizza bagel, Elias said from his position on the floor, where he was attempting to childproof the lab's lower cabinets. Efficiency isn't everything. Your species also produced reality television and wars over religious texts written by people who didn't understand basic hygiene, Lyria countered. Random chance cuts both ways. Fair point. Elias secured another cabinet lock, though he suspected it wouldn't stop telekinetic babies for long. But your children exist because of random chance. That mutation happened naturally, right? Lyria's patterns dimmed slightly. Yes. No one knows why. Genetic screening should have caught it, prevented it. Instead, I carried them to term before anyone realized they were wrong. By Kaylee law, they should have been terminated immediately. I had 3 days to say goodbye. I used those 3 days to plan my escape. That's not a goodbye plan, Elias said. That's a screw your laws plan. In my language, they're the same phrase. The boy, who they'd started calling Atlas because he seemed determined to carry the weight of every object in the lab through sheer telekinetic stubbornness, made a sleepy sound and tried to grab his sister's ear. The girl, Nova, because her bioluminescent patterns were brighter than her brother's and reminded Elias of stellar explosions, swatted his hand away with more coordination than 3-week-old infants should possess. They're going to be trouble, Elias observed. They already are, Lyria said, but her voice was warm. They're alive when they shouldn't be. They're growing stronger in an environment that's not their own. They have abilities they can't control and a human trying to teach them table manners they don't need. They're perfect. Elias looked at her, this alien woman who'd chosen death over compliance, who was learning to drink coffee despite hating the taste because he made it every morning, who sang to her children in a language that made his equipment malfunction. We should The alarm system started screaming at 4 in the morning, which Elias had learned was the universe's favorite time for catastrophes. He jolted awake from his position on the floor where he'd fallen asleep monitoring equipment, nearly kicking over a bottle of formula that had somehow migrated across the room. Lyria was already moving, her reflexes considerably faster than his caffeine-deprived neurons could manage, scooping up both twins before they could fully wake and start their morning telekinetic chaos. Orbital contact, Elias said, reading the display with a sinking feeling that started in his stomach and worked its way through every other organ. Unknown vessel. They're not broadcasting standard identification codes. They wouldn't, Lyria said, her voice tight. Her bioluminescent patterns were flickering in a way he'd learned meant extreme stress. Kaylee Hunter ships operate in communication silence until they've secured their target. That's ominous and also incredibly rude. Elias was already moving to his secondary systems, pulling up every scanning protocol he had. How long do we have? If they follow standard procedure, they'll observe first, verify the target, then send a recovery team. 6 hours, maybe 8 if we're lucky. I've never been lucky, Elias muttered, but his hands were steady as he worked. 5 years of isolation had included extensive time preparing for emergencies, though he'd always imagined equipment failures or medical crises, not alien bounty hunters coming for his adopted family. Wait, there's something else. A second signal had appeared on his sensors, this one broadcasting proper Earth identification codes. Military frequencies, encrypted but following protocols he recognized from his days working with government contracts. Elias felt his blood pressure spike in new and creative ways. That's the Extraterrestrial Contact Division, he said, pulling up the transmission data. They've been monitoring this sector since the Mars colony started reporting unidentified vessels. They must have detected both your crash site and the Kaylee ship. So we have 2 groups coming for us, Lyria said. Atlas started fussing, sensing his mother's tension. That's either very good or catastrophically bad. Welcome to Earth politics, where everything is catastrophically complicated. Elias ran both hands through his hair, which he realized hadn't been washed in 3 days. The ECD will want to establish contact, document everything, probably take you somewhere secure for about 1 million tests and debriefings. The Kaylee will want to take you back for whatever passes as justice in a society that thinks genetic diversity is a crime. And I'm sitting here in a lab coat held together with coffee stains and denial. Nova made a sound that might have been a laugh. A pencil lifted off the desk and bopped Elias gently on the head. Your daughter is mocking me during a crisis, Elias said. She has good instincts, Lyria replied, but she was pacing now, that restless energy he recognized. We need to decide. Run or fight. Or option 3, Elias said slowly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or would get them all killed. We go loud. Lyria stopped pacing. Explain. The Kaylee want to keep this quiet, right? Retrieve the defective products, eliminate the evidence, maintain their genetic purity narrative. The ECD wants first contact glory and scientific data. Neither group knows about the other yet, or they're pretending not to. What if we force them to acknowledge each other? You want to start an interstellar incident, Lyria said. I want to make it politically impossible for the Kaylee to just disappear you, Elias corrected. If we broadcast our story, make contact with Earth authorities publicly, claim asylum under whatever interstellar laws we can cite, then the Kaylee can't just swoop in and erase you without creating exactly the kind of attention they're trying to avoid. That's insane, Lyria said. Atlas had stopped fussing and was watching his mother with those two intelligent eyes. It might also work. But it means trusting your authorities. I don't trust authorities, Elias admitted. But I trust bureaucracy. Nothing stops government action like paperwork and public scrutiny. If we can make this complicated enough, loud enough, official enough, then maybe we buy time to figure out a real solution. A priority transmission came through, encoded with military encryption that Elias's system struggled to decode. When it finally cleared, a voice emerged, professional and female, with the kind of calm that suggested extensive training in not panicking during alien encounters. Dr. Elias Verne, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the Extraterrestrial Contact Division. We've detected anomalous signals from your location and an unidentified vessel in orbit. Please respond with your status. Elias looked at Lyria. She looked back, then down at the twins, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. He opened the channel. Commander Chen, this is Verne. My status is complicated. I'm currently providing refuge to 3 individuals of non-terrestrial origin, including 2 infants. There's a Kaylee vessel in orbit that I believe is here to forcibly retrieve them against their will. I'm requesting immediate assistance and formal asylum proceedings under Earth law. Silence. Long enough that Elias wondered if he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. Then Chen's voice returned, carefully neutral. Dr. Verne, can you confirm you have made contact with extraterrestrial life? I can confirm I pulled 3 freezing individuals out of a blizzard and they turned out to be aliens, yes. Though, contact makes it sound more official than the reality, which involved a lot of improvised bottles and learning that alien babies can throw things with their minds. Stand by. Another silence, then Chen again, speaking faster. We're detecting the orbital vessel beginning descent. They're not responding to our hails. ETA to your location is 40 minutes. Dr. Verne, I need you to secure your facility and maintain communication. We have a team inbound, but they're 3 hours out. 3 hours is substantially longer than 40 minutes, Elias said. I'm a xenobiologist, not a mathematician, but even I can see the problem with that timeline. Nova chose that moment to demonstrate her developing telekinetic abilities by lifting every loose object in the lab simultaneously. Pens, tablets, coffee mugs, and one extremely surprised potted plant began orbiting the room like a very disorganized solar system. Nova, now is not the time, Elias said. Is that the infant? Chen asked, her professional calm cracking slightly. The infant is doing that? They're very advanced for their age, Lyria said, moving close enough to speak into the comm. Commander Chen, I am Lyria of the Kaylee Exploration Fleet. I formally request asylum for myself and my children under any applicable terrestrial law. We are fleeing genetic persecution and face execution if returned to Kaylee custody. My children have committed no crime except existing. Another pause, and Elias could almost hear the commander's mind working through protocols that had probably been theoretical until about 30 seconds ago. Asylum request acknowledged, Chen said finally. Dr. Verne, Lyria, I need you to hold your position. Do not engage with the Kaylee vessel. We're scrambling additional support, but you need to delay any contact. The Kaylee shuttle landed with the kind of precision that made Elias's equipment look like it had been assembled by enthusiastic children. The vessel was sleek, angular, and completely silent, which somehow made it more threatening than if it had arrived with dramatic engine roars. Elias watched through his external cameras as a ramp extended and a single figure emerged, tall and sharp in ways that made Lyria look soft by comparison. "That's Enforcer Kalas," Lyria said, her voice flat. "He specializes in genetic compliance. The fact they sent him means they're not interested in negotiation." "Everyone's interested in negotiation if you make it annoying enough to refuse," Elias said. He was running on pure adrenaline and the last dregs of coffee that tasted like regret. "How's your combat readiness?" "I'm holding 2 infants," Lyria pointed out. "Right. Bad question." He checked his chronometer. 37 minutes until the ECD arrived. The universe had never felt so vast or so slow. "Okay, new plan. I'm going to talk to him." "That's suicide," Lyria said. "That's humanity's primary survival strategy," Elias corrected. He moved to the external comm system, took a breath that did nothing to calm his nerves, and opened a channel. "Enforcer Kalas, this is Dr. Elias Verne. Welcome to Earth. I'd offer you coffee, but I suspect we're past pleasantries." The figure outside stopped, turned toward the camera. Even through the grainy feed, Elias could see the contempt in his posture. "Dr. Verne," Kalas said, his English perfect and cold. "You are harboring Kaylee property. Surrender Lyria and the aberrations immediately, and your involvement in this matter will be overlooked." "Property," Elias repeated. "That's fascinating terminology for people. We stopped using that framework a few centuries ago. Didn't go well for us." "Your primitive ethical frameworks are irrelevant," Kalas said. "Lyria violated genetic protocols. The mutations she carried must be eliminated to prevent contamination of the Kaylee genetic line. This is not negotiable." Atlas started crying, that distinctive sound that bypassed all of Elias's defenses. Nova joined in immediately, twin solidarity in action. Lyria was murmuring to them, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in soothing rhythms, but Elias could see the fear in every line of her body. "Here's the thing," Elias said, surprised by how steady his voice was. "You're operating under the assumption that you can just walk in here and take them. But you're on Earth now. We have laws. Primitive ones, sure, but we're quite attached to them. And one of those laws says that people seeking refuge from persecution get a hearing before anyone gets eliminated. Earth law does not apply to Kaylee citizens," Kalas said. "Lyria renounced her citizenship the moment she stole that shuttle," Elias countered. "She's stateless, which means she falls under our jurisdiction. And her children were born in Earth's atmosphere during that crash. That makes them terrestrial by birth. So actually, Enforcer, you're the one in violation here. You're attempting to kidnap Earth residents." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. Elias could practically hear Kalas recalculating. "Your legal fictions mean nothing," Kalas said finally. "I have a mandate from the Kaylee Council. I will retrieve the aberrations with or without your cooperation. Then you'll be starting an interstellar incident with a species that really enjoys making things complicated," Elias said. "We have an entire governmental division dedicated to extraterrestrial contact. They're inbound now, and they're very interested in meeting you. Unless you want to explain to the Kaylee Council why you started a diplomatic crisis over 2 infants, I suggest you wait." Kalas moved toward the station's entrance. Elias's door sensors started registering attempted access, sophisticated overrides working against his admittedly basic security. "Lyria," Elias said quietly, "take the twins to the backup shelter. The one we set up last week." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You're not. You're protecting them while I buy time." He met her eyes, trying to convey everything he couldn't say with the Kaylee listening. "Trust me. We're in this together, remember?" She hesitated, then nodded. As she moved toward the concealed shelter they'd prepared during their paranoid planning sessions, Atlas reached out toward Elias with one small hand. The gesture broke something in his chest and rebuilt it stronger. The door alarms shrieked. Kalas had breached the first security layer. "Commander Chen," Elias said, switching channels, I hope you're close because things are getting exciting here. 14 minutes out, Chen replied, and Elias could hear engines in the background. Hold position. Not really an option anymore. The second security layer failed. But I'm excellent at improvisation. Kalas entered the lab with the kind of casual confidence that came from genetic superiority and probably several centuries of getting his way. Up close, he was even more intimidating, his features sharp enough to cut, his eyes scanning the space with predatory efficiency. Where are they? He demanded. Coffee? Elias offered, holding up his perpetually stained mug. It's terrible, but it's hot. Kalas's hand moved, and suddenly Elias couldn't breathe. Some kind of telekinetic grip around his throat, precise and surgical. He clawed at his neck uselessly, spots dancing in his vision. I will ask once more, Kalas said. Where are the aberrations? A bottle shot across the room and smashed into Kalas's head with enough force to make him stumble. His concentration broke, and Elias collapsed, gasping. More objects started flying, a telekinetic barrage that was completely uncontrolled but extremely enthusiastic. Pens, tablets, equipment, that same unfortunate potted plant. Lyria emerged from the shelter, her eyes blazing, her bioluminescent patterns bright enough to hurt. You want them, she said. You go through me first. Gladly, Kalas replied, recovering his composure. Then the entire station shook as something massive landed outside. The ECD had arrived, and they'd brought friends. Through the cameras, Elias could see military transport vehicles, personnel in tactical gear, and enough official presence to make any bureaucrat proud. Chen's voice came through every speaker simultaneously. This is Commander Chen of the Earth Extraterrestrial Contact Division. Enforcer Kalas, you are in violation of terrestrial airspace and have committed assault against an Earth citizen. Stand down immediately. Kalas looked at Elias, then at Lyria, then at the twins who were peeking out from the shelter with expressions that suggested they'd enjoyed their telekinetic tantrum. Calculations played across his face, cost-benefit analysis happening at superhuman speed. This isn't over, he said finally. The Council will not accept this contamination. Then the Council can file a formal diplomatic complaint, Chen said, entering the lab with a security team that looked very ready for violence. Through proper channels. Which will take approximately forever because we just invented those channels about 20 minutes ago and they're very complicated. Kalas stared at them all for a long moment, then turned and left with movements so smooth they barely seemed real. His shuttle departed seconds later, ascending with that same eerie silence. The lab filled with people, voices, equipment. Someone was checking Elias for injuries while someone else was attempting to communicate with Lyria while multiple someones were trying to figure out how to approach telekinetic infants without getting hit by flying objects. It was chaos, beautiful bureaucratic chaos that meant safety through complication. Chen stood in the center of it all, somehow managing to look competent despite the insanity. Dr. Verne, she said, you've just created history's first interstellar asylum case. The paperwork alone will take years. Years sounds perfect, Elias replied, his throat still aching. We could use the time. Lyria was holding the twins close, her eyes wet but her spine straight. What happens now? She asked. Chen looked at her, then at the babies who were making sounds that might have been curiosity or might have been plans for more telekinetic chaos. Now we figure out how this works.